in order to really talk through this, we have to talk about process. So one of my favorite topics, because I hate process. The way I like to describe it is everything I learned about what I do, it's really what not to do, learned from IBM and all of their massive, massive, massive amounts of process.
Welcome everyone to the Talking Roadmaps channel, the show where we talk about everything roadmaps, but also some other topics which I'm going to share with you in a moment. We're going to talk about the good, the bad and ugly of product operations. Product operations is really quite a critical role now, supporting the product management function. And my special guest today, we're going to talk about product ops, product management, road mapping, and the intersections of all of those as well. And so that really leaves nothing more for me to introduce the fantastic May Wong. May and I first became aware of May last year on the Product Conversations, which is a podcast that she co-produces with Grant Hunter and Steve Johnson, who I'm big fans of from Product Growth Leaders. And I've really appreciated May's funny yet on-point LinkedIn posts. I've been watching those, May, about product management and product operations. Just puts a comedy angle on some really interesting and poignant points. Late last year, I was fortunate enough to be a guest on Product Conversations alongside May, Grant, Steve, my friend and former colleague Elliot Golden, and of course my Talking Roadmaps co-host Phil Hornby. So it brings me great pleasure, May. Welcome. Please give us an introduction, though, for people that might not be aware of you.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, I'm May, and I am based out of very cold and snowy Toronto, although it's getting slightly warmer. And I do product operations. Usually I define myself more as a product nerd first, and then that kind of evolves into product operations, but also many different aspects of product as well. So if you ever see me or come across me and you want to talk product, we might be at it for hours. So what I do is I work with product leaders. Really, I think of it as a partnership, but I usually get employed full time. And we work out what better product management looks like in that context of the organization. It's going to vary drastically, and the three things that I think makes it vary are your organization, your product itself or your portfolio, and the market that it's in. And anytime any of those things changes, like everything changes about how you have to work. So yeah, what better looks like looks very different from forget from company to company, even from like quarter to quarter.
If you're enjoying the channel, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and give us a like. Right, or even team to team, right? Sometimes we get these different pockets of progress and excellence within them.
Yeah, the way I like to think about product operations, though, it's more the scale of product. So, like, even if you have multiple product teams, they have different ways of working. You still really want to think about as a whole how your org works together, right? Because having to reinvent the wheel every time you have a new team, or every single team has to do it every time you have a new system on the other side, like it's going to be really hard to figure that out. So that's kind of what it is. It's that thinking about scale at pockets above and beyond the different teams, if there is some.
And so would you say that's, yeah, well, we hope there is. I'm sure there is. There definitely is. So does that feed into kind of your definition of the purpose of product operations then, or how would you define product operations?
I define there's two ways I define product operations. One is to product leaders and product managers. I define it as I product manage the product management discipline and the context in which it exists, right? So the discipline is how do we do product, and the context is the org and the market that we're in and the product that we're building. But like that's complex. So what you're doing is you're looking for problems in this space, and then you explore it, and then you prioritize. You know, it's product management. Half the time you're doing the things because you don't really have a team. I've seen places where they have a whole like product ops engineers and product ops, like product ops. I've seen that. Like it could be anything.
I guess sometimes they're doing product operations and not even knowing it sometimes. Let's look at this from maybe a slightly different angle, which is why companies might need product operations.
So how the way I think about it is that everyone's doing product operations, right? If you think about any job you've ever done, have you ever been stuck? Right? What percentage of time would you say you've been stuck?
I think sometimes it's I don't know, 20% of the time, 10% of the time. It's not often, but sometimes it's just like second guessing yourself, or what's the best way to do this, or researching what other people have done. I think sometimes there's the doing, and then there's like, am I doing it right?
Yeah, and but half the time, your job is not to figure out how do I do it right. Your job is to do it right.
Right.
And so the time you spent on figuring out how do I do it right in the context of what you can control, it's pretty minimal. So what ends up happening is this work gets dumped on the product leader. And the way I think about what a product leader does, to put it really, really simply, a product leader has 5 jobs. 1 is people management, because you're a people manager now. 2 is your product or portfolio strategy, so everyone who reports to you, what's the strategy there. 3 is stakeholder management, up, down, and sideways, constantly. 4 is the layer of strategy above you. Does your strategy fit into that, and or does it exist? Because if it doesn't exist or it doesn't align, you have to either force that alignment top down or force that alignment bottom up. And that's a whole new job on itself. And number 5 is what I call, how does my team work together within the context of all this? And that's product ops, right? And so out of those 5 things, everything's on fire. What's the lowest priority? How does my team work together? So over and over again, you see like really great people become product leaders with the aspiration to build a great product organizations with good strategy, and they kind of get stuck in the same trap over and over again because they just don't have time for it. Because as a product leader, your number 1 priority is your people and the strategy. And how that happens within the larger context, within like how you have to work with all your other peers and really do that really hard work of understanding like, why is everything terrible right now? Like, it's not necessarily terrible, okay? but like sometimes it feels like that, and often it feels like that. That's a lot of work, because most likely what happens is you put in Band-Aid solutions, right? So if, say, you're working with a difficult leader on another team, what people try to do is protect their team. So they say, okay, if you want to talk to us, you go through this channel, right? And that's how silos start to form. There's like retaliatory silos. There's like people who are like, I see what they're doing and I want to protect my team as well. And then like everyone just starts building these walls. And then a year later, you can't actually talk to each other anymore.
Not unless you throw a ticket over.
Yeah, but the ticket has to go like up, over, down, over, up, down, or whatever it might be, right? Like, and so it's just like not having the time to intentionally plan what your organization could be, to think about how do we do, and with the lens of what does a good product organization look like? What does a good product organization that is designed, and not necessarily designed, but like cultivated to collectively build good products? What does that look like? And from there you can grow, right? Like, but without doing that work, it's really, really hard. And some people have that, right? Some people have done that work, but how does it transition to scale? And so that's kind of the next part.
Yeah, or sometimes it happens by accident and it wasn't intentional, and that's great. But then how do you recreate that, right? If your teams might happen to be self-forming and self-aligning, and that's great. But if it wasn't intentional, it's not repeatable. And it's a really good point, actually, because when I've worked with companies in a product management road mapping perspective, and obviously interfacing in with engineering, there's a lot of legacy configuration of those teams even, right? Operationally, they're set up not necessarily in the right way. They're set up in terms of components or these types of things. And they're not engineered in order to solve problems. They're just to look at different components of a system. And so do you find that the product operations looks into the elements of how we build product as well and steps into the development side of things?
It depends on the organization. Like, does it exist on the other side is what I look for, right? Like, so if someone is taking very clear ownership of their domain, either in design or in engineering, like if there's a strong SRE team that's thinking about these problems or a strong agile team that's doing that, the first thing I do when I meet either a new leader or the person doing it or I'm coming in is we sit down and we talk about what do we think our boundaries are and where and how do we work in the gray areas. Because it's not like it's the way I like to think about. Okay, let's in order to really talk through this, we have to talk about process. So one of my favorite topics, because I hate process. The way I like to describe it is everything I learned about what I do, it's really what not to do, learned from IBM and all of their massive amounts of process.
I'm a former IBMer as well.
I became the person at my company who knew how to ship new products at IBM. It is a lot. It's a lot. And so the way we think about process is this thing happens, so you do A, you do B, you do C, and once all of that due diligence is done, then D can happen, right? But nowhere in there do we talk about the why. Nowhere in there do we talk about what is the actual thing that this process is supposed to accomplish. And when was this established? Like, how long ago and how many systems ago and how many other systems that are adjacent to this have changed since this was put in place? And how do you change that, right? And the way I like to think about process is process exists where you don't want people to be creative. Yeah. And so like a lot of companies, as they grow and scale, their instinct, because that's what we've been exposed to our lives, is what systems do we need to put in place what process do we need to put in place so that we can scale? And my answer to that is always, well, the second you scale, your process is broken. Because anytime you change any factor by like 20 to 40%, you're done. Like you have to think. Yeah, exactly. So the way I like to think about process really is that you have these bubbles of. You have these teams, like these small interdisciplinary teams that work together. Some people call it a pod, some people call it a squad, whatever it might be. Like these teams of people who work together, usually a product manager, a bunch of developers, some QA people, designers, and whoever else might be involved in that, like, be it long-term, short-term, whatever it might be. And they need three things to be successful in order to do their thing, which is autonomy to make decisions, alignment with the overarching goals, so each of these teams are working together, and access to information to make decisions, better decisions, right? So all of these things come together and they can do the thing. You just give them the thing. But how do these teams work together beyond that? And that's where process kind of need to exist, but the bigger the process, the harder it is to change. And if you tack on more and more teams as you rapidly scale, like how does that change? Like they won't work. So really the way I like to think about the best kind of process is microprocess that does one thing. You need a series of microprocesses that are modular, and they act kind of as either decision points or really like human APIs that feed into them that gets the larger organization to where it needs to be. And really anything above that exists to support the smaller teams doing their things, including like, sales needs to have that autonomy to do what they need to do, but they also need ways to connect back to us to let us know what they've learned and also like what are the challenges and also what they need, right? So it's that constant stream of communication and all of those lines on this map of like, where does information need to go? So in terms of like going back to your question of like who owns what, I feel like when we talk about the layers of ops, we sit in the gray area between those teams, the independent individual teams that need to do their actual work, and we need to figure out how to best help those teams. And it's not about us or our egos or whatever it might be. It's about you have your domain expertise, I have mine. Like, let's talk about what it is that we're advocating for and what's the best solution in this context. And it's just like, in product management, we say, okay, well, bring your problems and talk to the teams. Well, I'm not the expert in SR yet. I don't know anything. I don't know anything about design systems, and nor like I think it's cool, but like I'm never going to be the person building your design system, right? So like I bring these people together, and we're like, okay, this is a problem. Like, I don't even know who solves this, but like let's talk about it. Let's work it out. Let's figure it out.
Nice. So there's a level of rigor there that's important, but also open-mindedness. There's a level of process and repeatability, but also autonomy. It's a careful balance. And I'm curious, what is the collaboration between ProdUctOps and product management? Is there any frictional overlap? And I think that ties into what you were saying there, is sometimes it's just about having a conversation. It's not going in with a rigid set of this is what we do, this is what you do. It's kind of understanding what each other does and spotting the gray areas in between. Is that right?
It's a little different when it comes to product ops and product management. So product ops as a function, so it could be nobody. It could be one person and it could be a team, right? So product ops, if it's nobody, then it's usually either a delegated part-time person or an individual just carving out time, trying to figure out better. But like the scope of what better could be is limited by your power mandate and influence. Not even capacity, because a lot of people who want to do this work, who feel like it's absolutely necessary to be able to do what they want to do, they'll do it. Right? But that's how people burn out. Like, Jenny Weyer calls it a shadow product ops, where people do all this work and they don't get recognized for it because people are like, oh, this is just a part of product management, right? This is why product management is terrible, but we're going to make you do it anyways. And it doesn't have to be this way, especially if your company is growing. Like you really have to think about what scale looks like from that angle.
Awesome. And just, I get excited by it because there's been elements, I've been in product management since 2006, I think, in and out and in and around it. And it's been great to see it grow. When I first joined, it was more around strategy and commercial. Then it went to sweep, and now the pendulum's coming back the other way again. But it's great to kind of see that growth. So I'm excited to speak to her and get her feeling on it. I guess, do we need to justify having product ops? So you mentioned about some people just doing the do because they need to. It needed to be done. How does that work within organizations? Because I think you've played a part in that as well, demonstrating to companies why product operations is important and needed. So
it's one of those things that like often don't get recognized because we're talking about incremental change when we talk about measuring success. And generally speaking, that's how product management is measured. And if you're talking about improving that, it's really like product management is, I'm going to be a nerd here, is like the first differential. It's like the first order change where you're steering the company and towards progress, whatever progress might be. Mm-hmm. And if you have someone who can say like, so if this is your curve, and if someone can do this, or someone can do this, or someone can do like even just like a little bit, that makes a lot of difference over time, because a graph that looks like this in terms of speed, it like the actual output kind of goes like this. Right. So it's Yeah, it compounds because like the way we think about it, it doesn't humanly really process. But when we think about the actual mathematical interpretations of like, and if you go back into your calculus course in high school, like thinking about how all that compounds. Okay, I am a licensed math teacher.
Oh, amazing. Okay, I'm in safe hands then, because I wasn't great at maths at school. You can go calculus if you need to. I love it. But it becomes, I can resonate with what you're saying, because I come in, I'm known for being a tool implementer, certainly around roadmaps. But roadmaps is really just, you remove the cape and it's product management, right? It's just that I put myself in the road mapping side of things. But where I was going with this is that one of the challenges I have is demonstrating the benefits of road mapping, right? It's like people bring me in because they have identified they're not doing roadmaps well, or they're using a certain road mapping tool that they want to implement. But being able to demonstrate the benefits of that becomes a lot more subjective. It's really difficult to say, I have increased the efficiency of the product function by X, or decreased it by Y, or increased efficiency of creating roadmaps. Often because the companies themselves don't know that. And it's, they bring me in and I'm having to make sure that we are providing a benefit. I deliver the goals that they've wanted, but making that actually measurable becomes really difficult. And I guess that might be something similar to product ops, is that this difficulty in to demonstrate the empirical change that you make.
It actually happens the other way around. So most people I've talked to who were the first product ops person in their company, and this happened to me as well, the first thing they get asked to do is to build the roadmap. It is an expectation of someone coming into a product management discipline as a product ops.
Product management, 100%. Yeah. Show me the roadmap.
No. If you are the first product ops person going into a product management team, the first thing they get asked is to build the roadmap. I'm not talking about like the individual PMs building the roadmaps. I mean like the portfolio roadmap. And because every time they've tried it before has been a struggle. And so you go in and you look, and then you realize, these requirements are coming from sales. These requirements are coming from engineering. These requirements have been living in the backlog for 3 years, and it's just like, what is a roadmap? And I think most product ops people who and we've talked about this on product conversations, like most product ops people who go through this thought process of like, what even is a roadmap? Right. Hits that point as they are going through this for the very first time. Because the expectation, especially if you've been a product manager before, you've like worked near a product before, you've seen a roadmap and you're like, okay, this thing kind of sort of works. And then you come in and you're asked to build a roadmap, and you bring everything and it's not enough, because the problem is not the roadmap. The problem is product management. I don't have to tell you this, but like the problem is product management. And so you have an absolute dilemma. You're being asked to put in a roadmap. The roadmap's not going to be successful because it's never been successful, and you are being asked to put in an artifact that represents and will show product success in a place that like has traditionally not been able to pull it off.
Totally. And the behaviors mean it's not even possible anyway.
On top of that, you're being asked to put in a roadmap, which means that they don't want to use sheets anymore or like a spreadsheet anymore and PowerPoint to manually do the roadmap. They want a product management tool. And you know what? They've even allocated budget for it, which is great. So without this knowledge, you go and look for tools. This might be describing my own personal experience and like countless others. Right? Like, so you go and look for a tool, and you find all these tools, and all these tools are whole product management platforms. They don't exist as a roadmap. And you're like, okay, well, I guess I have to buy into their philosophy. And so the first thing the salesperson asks you is, what is your product development lifecycle? And you're like, my what? It doesn't exist. We are starting our transformation, and we started with the one thing that's needed to communicate what it is that we're trying to do in order to start the rest of it. And And now you're being asked to define your product development lifecycle in order to feed your roadmap, in order to produce this one artifact. And the artifact is what people actually want right now, and you can get to the rest later, but you can't generate that artifact with the tools.
I mean, you're describing life for me. I love this. I'm living cathartically. That's why I love talking roadmaps as the show, because I get to geek out with great guests like you. But I'm just like, it's so true. And actually, what I find is that the tip of that iceberg is kind of the roadmap, but everything else is the scaffolding that needs to get us there. And what I find is that when I go into these companies and work with clients, 20% of my job, maybe even less, is configuration of the tool that they've brought me into. The rest of it is process, politics, bureaucracy, power structures, everything else within there. And that's the thing is, and often it's even worse than that. Like, Justin, can you train us on this tool? And then you're even higher up, because I can't train you until I know what your processes are. You can't know what your processes are until you know the story, right? So what you're sharing with me is deeply resonating, and it's so true.
And at the same time, right, when this is happening, because this usually happens at a time of great change, which means either scale, acquisition of another company, or getting acquired, and transformation looks really different depending on like what's happening. Like if you're a legacy company trying to become an agile company, you've implemented a lot of changes. Like all of those changes aren't happening on the product side. Most of the time, they're being pushed into development, and development's going through their own agile transformation. And the reason why you wanted this roadmap in the first place is because their agile transformation demanded it. Right. And so this interface is broken because fundamentally, building a roadmap to serve another team's very specific function so that they can transform, and then from there they tell us what to do, because that's how product management operates. Like that's not really feasible, because Agile is not a product management framework. Agile is a development framework, and it works really well for development, and product management needs to be able to interface with that, but it's not defining product management, right? Like
your PMLC is not your SDLC,
but it's your product development lifecycle. Even the roadmap vendors will ask you for your product development lifecycle, because your product management lifecycle is heavily dependent on product development, right? Like they're not separate; they can't be separate. Right. It's really about thinking about those interfaces. So kind of going back to intentionally thinking about how your organizations are set up and designed, and like how do all these teams work together, especially as you scale. You know, I had a company come and ask me what it is that they could do to do things better. They're going to scale. They've already doubled in the past year. They want to add another 40% this year, and all they need is just process to make it work. And it doesn't work like that, because as you scale and change, everything changes around you, right? Like, you can't just tack on another team and pretend like everything's going to be okay. So the question I ask is, okay, say a year from now you hire all the people you need, and your teams are that much bigger to what the size you think you need is. Can you do everything the same way you work today? And they're like, well, yes, we just implemented SAFe. And I said, okay, well, you've just implemented it, so that means it's pretty it's early, but it's established. How you work today, is that going to happen at that same scale? And then they think about it, and then they go to the next question, right? Like because it's a terrifying thing to think about, because you've just gone through so much change. Oh man! And you're talking about change fatigue now.
You are. I worked with one of my clients who'd implemented Scaled Agile because leadership wanted, let's face it, more delivery, more speed, not really understanding everything else that SAFe was incumbent across the entire organization. But anyway, they'd implemented it. It'd taken a while in order to bed in, because your velocity will drop probably initially whilst teams are learning new ways of working and everything else. And then what had happened is, after 18 months, they didn't get the velocity that they wanted. New leadership came in and reversed the Scaled Agile transformation. And you talk about, change fatigue, and absolutely right there. I think this is a whole conversation you and I could go down into for hours, I'm sure, but it absolutely resonates. But right, exactly.
Right? Like, this is product ops. It's like, what happens when change happens, and the change happens almost always from the top.
And a function that outlives the tenure of the leadership is also helpful, because otherwise we just keep making changes.
And so, like, kind of really digging down to what we're talking about, right? What's the most resilient part that stands the test of M&As and leadership changes and like direction changes is team culture. And when I say team culture, I don't mean company culture. I mean team culture. The individual blocks of people actually doing the work and what ties those teams together on top of that. Because if the individual teams already have a very strong bond with each other in a way, and like just feel strongly about what a good way of working, then they can push back against things that they feel are unnecessary. But it's not necessarily about pushback. It's also about like, here's a really good way of working, and we are actually working really well. And we have ways to talk about our successes and what we've tried and what we've learned and grow with that. Right? And it's all those systems around it that feed and sustain these healthy teams to become successful, to stand the test of like attrition and market pressures and like a whole pandemic or like the Great Resignation, all these things that come in and happen, they're going to happen. Like, big changes are going to happen. It's almost always out of our control, but what we can control is the kind of environment we build for the people who work here. Yeah,
I'm just basking in that, what you've just shared with me there, because it makes so much sense. And I think with our audience, it will as well. It's what I see within companies. It's the teams that do the work, make it work. And that's really important. So, yeah, I was just taking some time there just to reflect on what you were saying. Why don't we switch gears and do a couple of quick fire questions here, because I'm curious to understand some of the good and bad of product ops. So what would you consider is a best practice, or at least, I'm not a fan of best practice, a good practice in product ops? What's a good practice?
I'm going to talk about not a good practice in product ops, but a good how product ops is successful. What makes product ops successful is having a seat at the leadership table. Because we're fundamentally talking about how the product management discipline exists. And without someone with a voice advocating for that in product leadership, it doesn't usually work out well, right? So that the way we have to interact, I think there's three things that are necessary to make any kind of change in an organization successful, especially with the person leading it. One is you need the power, you need the mandate to do that change, and you need a lot of luck. Like, those circumstances around you matter, right? And if you see everything against you, hey, don't bother. Try something else. Build the foundation to get to the change that you want. But you can't go from 0 to 1, right? Like, if you just had an incredible leader join, they want to make their mark, and if everything's aligned, then great. That's the way into it. Yeah, and that was the perfect set of circumstances I found myself in. And like, we were able to basically turn a company, an organization that was told what to do, to like, we built our own roadmap. We took dates off the roadmap. Like, we had a single prioritized list of big bets that was agreed upon by the whole organization.
You didn't have a strategy as well, did you, May?
We did. But the big bets is the trade-off.
Strategically placed, yeah, exactly. I love that. What about some of the big mistakes that people might make in product ops?
It's really easy to get caught up by the small things, right? So one of my personal rules when I do product ops, like, everything you take on is a project, because it has to end. Otherwise, you own it forever. The only thing that you end up owning over that duration is tooling. You can't avoid it. You own the tools. But any kind of change, the goal is to make the people who are impacted by the change and the people making decisions on that change, they own it going forward.
So you are consultative, but you're not BAU.
Like you might be involved for a little bit, but you have to see yourself out of that process. Because after 5 changes, you don't have time. But it's so easy to get caught up in it because you're like, oh, it's still changing. Like, I need to see this through. And it's like, no, the goal is to train the people to do the changes themselves, right? Like, I tell people that my job is to work myself out of the job because if you don't need me there, you're good.
And I feel the same way about as a consultant in the way that I like to work with people as well, because otherwise I will just be employed by that company to do the BAU. That's not what I want to be doing. I'll not have a wider influence, but I love that. You know, it's like the project-based approach is great thought.
I mean, like, it's project-based, but your product, like, I think of them as like features you kind of build on top, and then you keep an eye on them. But ideally, you have someone else keep an eye on them, so it's someone else's problem.
Yeah, exactly. So talking about multiple changes and bringing those in, but never really being the in-life owner, does ProdUctOps therefore need its own ProdUctOps roadmap?
Most people have one, mostly because they need to justify our existence. It's important to think about what's coming next, because then you also, like, while you are doing the discovery for whatever you're doing, you might want to do partial discovery for the next thing as well. Right? It's a continuous process of learning. Your priorities are going to shift. And it's really about the way I think about prioritization of like what's most important in product ops. The way I do it is three tiers. One is something stopping us from shipping today? Because delivery is actually the most expensive thing and therefore the most important thing to untangle. 2, is something causing conflict? And conflict is what slows people down, but it's like a second order slowing. So the more conflict you have, the like quadratically slower, exponentially slower people work.
Q math teacher, but I'm with you. I've got enough math to understand that. But yeah, right, it's exponential.
Yeah, and so it's really important to look for those areas. And then the third thing is just, standard strategy, what's important, what's quick, what's...
Yeah, absolutely. How does ProdUctOps get involved with the road mapping process?
It is communication is what's broken. It's not the roadmap. The roadmap is a symptom. The lack of a roadmap is a symptom, but the communication is so much more than that, right? A lot of the times, like when you do your first month of interviews, everyone's just like, I don't hear anything from product. Or all I get from product is things I don't need. I don't care about that.
What I asked for wasn't on the list. I'm not happy.
And then you talk to the PMs, they're like, we're trying so hard, but we're so burnt out. Like, I got so many things on the go. And then you look and you see, like, there's 20 meetings they're in that there shouldn't be in. And so it comes back to role clarity. Like, this is role clarity. This is about really, like, what do you want product managers to be doing here? Right. So for me, when I look for a product leader to work with, it's our understanding and like just basic principles behind product management have to be at least spiritually aligned. We don't have to use the same words. We don't have to use the same frameworks. I don't really believe in frameworks, but whatever. But it's just like all of these things together, like we need to be able to work together. And I am here to build the team that can get you to your strategy and your vision faster, right? That's what I do.
Yeah, I love that spiritual alignment. It's just even maybe that goes back to the teams that you were talking about earlier. It's like they just need to be spiritually aligned, or even more so. But spiritual alignment, gosh, that's a great concept for me to take away and think about a little bit more. I totally agree. It's about that trust.
You can't do product management without trust.
Well, you can't. No, you can't. Some of the best relationships I've had are with product managers because you're in it together.
You're in it together, but like in terms of organizational trust, leadership trust, right? Like if you really want to do product management well, people have to trust you to make the right decisions. People have to trust you to like entrust you with more information, to tell you what's going on, to give you access to data, to give you access to the customers. There's so much trust involved. And then the developers need to trust you to tell them the right things, and like that they have the whole thing, and also to trust you to give them access to whatever they need and want to do things better. Same with the designers, same with like everyone in the ecosystem. And then you need sales to trust you, and marketing to trust you, and services to trust you, and ops to trust you if it's complicated, right? So all of these things come together, and it's all about trust. You are at the center of trust, and if you don't build that trust, you can't do it. And so, like, think about that operational infrastructure that allows you to build that trust easier, that allows you to hire a brand new PM and let them build that trust.
Do you know what, mate? I can't wait to listen back to this episode and make some notes myself, because I'm going to nod my head off in a minute. I know I love that. And actually, when I talk about roadmaps and what they are, it's about communication and alignment, but I think it's also trust I want to throw in there, and a level of confidence. I think confidence and trust are the same thing. Confidence for me would be how confident are we that we can do something, and then trust would be, we trust that the roadmap is going to reflect reality, and trust that the teams can talk about it. But I want to throw those 4 words in there now for roadmaps, just from what you've said, because I think it's so important. Love that. May, you've got some great ideas, and I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you share those in today's podcast, but also in some of the formats that you co-host and run yourself. I'm curious, whose advice on ProdUctOps do you listen to? And are there any resources that you'd recommend either myself or our listeners within Talking Roadmaps to go and check out?
My favorite people are Jenny Wanger, who writes a brilliant newsletter. I also just published a meeting audit on her newsletter back in December, so check that out if you're struggling with meetings. There is Graham Reed, who writes about practical product ops, and he's generally a lovely, lovely person. I really like Chris Compson's work. Obviously, there's John Cutler, and then who thinks about organizational design and scale. And
he's put some good stuff out recently about that.
I don't even know how to describe his work. But it's a lot of the inspiration behind what I do. And then there's Chris Butler, who who also exists on a different but practical but also interesting plane. But so all these people think about things very differently. There's also a lot of obviously voices of people who talk, and I think it's always interesting to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, I do too. So I'm thrilled that we've got a couple of those folks on the podcast as well. But also, it would be great to shine a spotlight on people that have got different backgrounds and at different companies to do that as well. So we'll be looking to do that on the channel. But thanks for sharing. I mean, that's a great list for us to work from. And so as we start to wrap up, I'm just curious, if you had to distill your philosophy of product operations into a couple of sentences, and by the way, it's okay if you go over, how would you describe it?
It's about building the right product discipline in that specific context by giving individual teams the autonomy, the alignment, and the access to information that they need to make better decisions, and then connecting those teams together so you're working together to build the same thing.
That's not the first time you've said that either, is it? That was very well articulated.
It might have changed a little bit throughout our conversation, but it tacked the things together.
What I love is it pulled the pieces from our conversation into that, which was really good. May, before I let you go, thank you so much. It's been a brilliant pleasure talking to you, but I wanted to give you an opportunity just to pitch yourself. If people have really enjoyed listening to you today, which I'm sure they will have, how can they get in contact and just let us know?
If you're a product leader who's thinking about how your team can work better, if you are coming up against a big change, whatever it might be, legacy products, trying to move to something better, or large organizations, if you're about to hit rapid scale through an investment, if you are, whatever it might be, M&A, that kind of change is where product operations allows you to build a strong foothold and that really strong product management discipline within your organization. So if you're not thinking about, it's not about now, it's about what you need to be to really push your organization forward during and through and past that change. So that's what I specialize in, complex operations. I love complexity. And so whatever it is, B2B specifically, it's usually B2B, B2B2C.
Is it Mary or Marie Kondo of ProdUctOps and messy company processes?
No. I'm a little more heavy-handed. Every time I talk to someone they're like, well, what's your special ability? And I say, I get large groups of people to do what they think that they don't want to do, but actually enjoy doing it.
Amazing. I mean, surely that's magic for a lot of companies. Superb. Well, look, May, I'm going to end it there for us. Thank you so much for joining us. And so for people at home, again, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast and on the YouTube channel. We love having you here. We love having you sharing your comments and reach out. We've had some great comments over the years. If you want to learn more about May, please do go and check out her on LinkedIn and get in contact that way. If you want to understand more about what we do here at Talking Roadmaps, and certainly from a product ops and road mapping perspective, then talkingroadmaps.com is where to go. You'll see previous episodes and details of workshops and some other things that we're going to be doing this year. But that just leaves me to say, May, thank you so much. I hope we get to speak again in the future. I really enjoyed that.
Me too. Thanks, Justin.